Jacob. So, happy Sabbath. It is really lovely to be here. I've been surprised by how many people I know here. I hadn't expected to see so many people. It's almost like a reunion. But I feel very welcome and at home here. Before I share my story, shall we bow our heads for a word of prayer? Gracious Father, Lord, as I share how you have called me and each of the other people here in this room to your ministry, may your name be glorified. May your Spirit be among us. Give us the blessings of a Sabbath fellowship today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I've been told that I can talk as long as I want, but if the podium starts sinking into the ground, I'll take that as a clue I need to stop. Okay. I wanted to share a little bit about how I was initially called to Mongolia. Everyone is just floored, like, why on earth would you go to Mongolia? And they're like, literally, as I was telling the kids, it's the middle of nowhere. Winter is about 7 months out of the year. When I left 2 weeks ago, it was negative 25. So I'm really enjoying this weather. I heard it's warm here too, but even up to about negative 2, 3, I'm still okay. But this weather is gorgeous. I'm actually hot. 27 years ago, I was a senior at PUC, and my father suddenly died of a stroke. He had not been an Adventist, nor had he even been a Christian, and frankly, if we're going to be honest about it, he was not even a good person. He was abusive, he was an alcoholic, he was downright mean, and when my mom became an Adventist, his abuse actually grew. So we used to get beaten for trying to keep the Sabbath. He would deliberately try and make us break Sabbath. He would give us money and say, oh, you need to go get a perm. And he knows I hate perms. So he's deliberately trying to do anything that he could to get us out to break the Sabbath. He would come home and I'd still have straight hair and I would get beaten again for that. So it was a really rough few years when we first became Adventists. And then finally, my mom had enough, but he had enough, and so he left us for good, and he divorced my mom when I was 16. So at that time, my mom said, okay, we've waited long enough, we can start going to church. Up until then, we had been keeping Sabbath and worshiping and fellowshipping at home. So I was super excited about going to church. And unfortunately, and I hope this is no longer the case these days, when we got there was a set little group of friends there who it was really hard to penetrate. So, we arrived at church, and we were basically in Korean, I don't know the exact translation in English, we were wangta, okay? So that means basically we were complete outsiders. We were ostracized. We were nobodies. And so it was very hurtful, especially because I had always expected to have this great, warm fellowship of believers that, we would have support for one another. And when the expectations fell far short of my needs, I was sadly disillusioned. However, as time grew, we managed to make a different group of friends, and we grew in the church, and I ended up going to PUC. Now, I was your typical overachieving, 1.5 generation Korean. So I was, super into studying and sports and, leadership and everything, and I had my 10-year plan laid out. I was your type A anal retentive person, and I stuck to it to a T until I got my rejection letter from Harvard. So that was the end of my life as I could see it. But, God works in mysterious ways, and when I ended up going to PUC on a full scholarship instead, I really found my niche. However, it was a slight detour, but I was still on my path. I was going to go into international law, and I was going to become a diplomat. So I was studying foreign languages right and left. I got into Berkeley Law School. Everything was settled, and like I said, that's when my father passed away. Now, when he died, and, we say this tongue-in-cheek, fortunately or unfortunately, because he lived a very sad life, on his deathbed, he accepted Christ. So we do have hope for a reunion where hopefully we can enjoy a true father-daughter relationship, or at least a friendlier relationship once we get to heaven. But for me, it was an eye-opening moment because I thought, how many other millions, billions of people around the world die without ever having had the opportunity to hear the gospel message? So I took another pause in my 10-year plan. I said, I'm still young. I was only 20. I graduated when I was 20 with a triple major in English, history, and French. So, like I said, your typical overachieving Korean. So I said, okay, Lord, since I'm only 20, I'm going to take a little bit of time out, and I'll give you 2 years of my life. Boy, wasn't I generous? Okay. So I said, Lord, I'm going to give you 2 years and I'm going to go off in mission service somewhere. So I contacted the General Conference. That was pretty cocky, don't you think? You know, you're right straight to the top level, you know. And interestingly enough, they had a really great opportunity. They had joined a multi-denominational group to enter one of the former Soviet countries, Uzbekistan. And so they added me to this group as the Adventist member, and we were slated to leave the summer after I graduated. And so I was planning for this, and I was like, oh, okay, I need to study Russian. So I started studying Russian, and I was all excited. And then just a month or so, just several weeks before graduation, we got this sudden letter from this group saying, oh, wait a minute, we didn't know you were a Seventh-day Adventist. We don't want you folks on our team. And I'm like, okay, that's really mean. What is the problem here? And they're like, oh, we can't deal with your Sabbath issues or your food issues. We need to have a more cohesive group, and you're going to cause problems. So I'm sorry, but your application has been rejected. So there I was. I had already delayed all my plans, and I had no idea what to do. And so I hit my knees. I said, Lord, there's got to be a reason for this, but I don't know what it is. So you're going to have to make your way clear. And at that time, the secretary in the General Conference office, her husband was a board member of Adventist Frontier Missions. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with them, but they're based out of Berrien Springs near Andrews, and they are church planting, self-supporting ministry. And they desperately needed someone to go to Mongolia. And this secretary contacted her husband and said, oh, there's this young lady whose plans have just gone awry at the last minute. Would you consider her? But they wanted to send couples. They believed in the 2x2, and they believed in long-term service. And they're like, oh, we can't send a single girl over there. She's only 20. And I wasn't even legal age yet. I couldn't go. So they were concerned, and they prayed about it. Switch mics again. Is this one okay? All right, so they extended the offer to me, and I thought, well, Uzbekistan, Mongolia, they're only, 5,000 miles apart. I can handle that. But I didn't know anything about Mongolia. And so I started doing some research, and I realized that the two things that I knew about Mongolia were false. We have been deceived, okay? Number one, it is not Genghis Khan, okay? It is Genghis. The Western world has warped his name, and Mongolians take strong offense to this. So everybody here in this room, learn it. It is Genghis Khan. The second thing is, Mongolian beef is not Mongolian. It is Chinese. So real Mongolian beef is you take a whole animal carcass and you throw it into a big hole with a bunch of hot steaming rocks. And then you pick out the goat hairs and use it as a toothpick. That's Mongolian barbecue. I think you guys may do a double take on that the next time you want to eat it. So those are the only two things I knew about Mongolia. I didn't know the capital city, I didn't know the population, I didn't know the weather, and so I started doing research. This is well before the internet. Okay, so I started reading Encyclopedia Britannica, and I found out all this information. Most of it was outdated. And because of the fall of communism, Mongolia had taken about 10 steps backwards. So we really knew next to nothing. The second obstacle for me was that to go through AFM, Adventist Frontier Missions, is self-supporting. And I'm about the worst sales pitch person in the world. I couldn't even sell Girl Scout cookies. My parents had to buy all of them and sell them to their colleagues. So I'm like, I don't do this fundraising stuff, Lord. If this is really your will, you're going to have to find a way to do this on your own. Well, people started hearing that, I was heading off there, and then Pastor Lonnie Melashenko, Voice of Prophecy, heard about this young girl who was willing to go to the outbacks of Mongolia and, minister. And so he had me interviewed on the Voice of Prophecy radio station. And, I didn't realize then what a big deal that was until money started pouring in. And he contacted us, and he's like, well, what do you want us to do with this money? We said, I don't know, send it to AFM. And then the Korean Chijosa, the Church Compass folks, they, heard about this. Oh, Korean American. They were so proud, going off as a frontier missionary. So they did an article on it, and money started pouring in. So they contacted my mom, what should we do with this? We sent it to AFM. Now, generally speaking, if you're aware of how the Frontier Missions projects and self-supporting ministries work, it takes almost a year or two to raise sufficient funds to launch. And within 3 months, 2 months, I was fully funded. And I'm like, okay, if that's not a sign, I don't know what is. All right, Lord, I will go. So here I was, Mission Institute, they're like, oh, we have to wait until you turn 21. So we waited over the summer, and then they shipped me off to China to head to Mongolia, and that was in August of 1992. So my first experience with Mongolia is just hilarious now. In retrospect, very funny. But at that time, I thought, this is the craziest thing I've ever done, and I'm going to die out here before I even step onto Mongolian soil. Because the flight from Beijing to Mongolia, which is only a couple hours, is on Mongolian Airlines. Never heard of it, right? You never want to hear about it. It's MIAT, Mongolian International Air Transportation, and the plane is an old Russian plane that probably got rejected from Aeroflot, which is in itself in terrible shape. So we get on this plane, and I'm starting to wonder what's wrong with my seat because it moves. So it's flopping forward and backward, and I'm like, I don't think it's supposed to do this. So call the flight attendant. She comes over. It's okay. That's not going to hurt you. So I'm like, all right, and so, I'm looking for my seatbelt. Well, my clasp is broken. I thought, oh, Lord, I'm really nervous, and I'm not even there yet. So I sat there, and I tied my seatbelt, okay? And then I'm waiting, and then all of a sudden I feel this drips of water. And I'm like, what is this? And I look up, and the air conditioning vent is dripping on me. And I was soaking wet, so I kept scooting over like this to avoid that. And the flight time has arrived and passed, well beyond its time, and I'm waiting and waiting. I called the other flight attendant. What's the problem? Oh, we can't get the emergency door to close. Number one, why was it even open? So I thought, ooh, that doesn't sound good either. We're waiting, another hour has passed, and they're like, oh, we've almost got it fixed. So I look over, and there's a crew welding the emergency door shut. Lord, please do not let us need the emergency exit. They welded the door shut, and about 3 hours later, we took off down the runway. So we're going. You think we're going to go, right? We go, and then we slow down, and we slow down some more, and then we turn around and come back. I'm like, now what? What is the problem? Well, apparently, the plane is overloaded. This is probably my fault. And I think my good friend Patrick there may know, because he helped me buy stuff to go. I had 6 or 7 70-pound bags. I had 50 pounds of rice, 50 pounds of wheat. I had no idea what to expect. I had a fax machine. I was taking things that I thought I was going to go out there and be stranded all by myself in the middle of nowhere. I took every precaution necessary. Well, apparently my 7 bags loaded the plane too much, and we couldn't lift. So we turned around. They unloaded a whole bunch of bags, and I'm like, please don't let mine be in there. And they said the next flight would bring them in. So here we go again, round 2. We get up, and we're going, and this time we actually lift off. So I'm like, okay, I'm on my way. Lord, I'm going to make it. Well, in Beijing, on August 31st, it was about 40 degrees, Celsius. So it was like, 85, 90 degrees Fahrenheit. It was so hot, so humid. I was in shorts and a T-shirt. So we're getting in, I'm looking in, you see these beautiful clear blue skies. Most of it's desert, but beautiful clear blue skies, nice and sunny. I'm like, oh, this is doable, I can handle this. And as we're descending, nobody listens to the seatbelt rules there, Everyone starts getting up and taking stuff out from the overhead compartments, and they're pulling out mink coats, fur coats, ski jackets, and I'm looking at them like, what on earth are they doing? And this little grandma taps me on the shoulder. Get your clothes on. I'm like, oh, no, I'm so hot. No, I don't need that. I got the air conditioning vent dripping on me, too. And, we're getting ready to land. You really shouldn't, but everybody was already up and in the aisles by the time we were getting ready to descend. We taxi. I don't see any buildings. We taxi, we stop, and they open the door, and I'm hit with a blast of negative 10-degree wind. In my shorts and T-shirt, California girl. So I thought, I'm going to die before I get to the jet bridge. They don't have a jet bridge. You actually have to walk down off of the plane. You have to go and get your own luggage from the cargo hold, and then you have to hike 1 kilometer to the airport terminal with my 7 bags. I sat down literally on the tarmac and started crying, but then my tears froze, so I had to get up. So, Lord, what am I going to do? So I took my backpack and a carry-on in one bag, and I ran as fast as I could to the terminal because I was literally freezing. And I get to the terminal, and the inside is like an ice block. It's a refrigerator. It's just as cold in there as it is outside. And I'm like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And at this time, Mongolia did not have any foreigners, so nobody spoke English. I didn't speak a lick of Mongolian. I'm like, sign language, my bag's over there, no carts, okay? So finally, I see these two little entrepreneurial boys, and I show them some greenbacks. I'm like, money? Money? I'm like, you go get my bags. Oh, that worked really well. Money communicates in any language. So they went running out with me, and I'm thinking, oh, what am I going to do with these bags? So I actually took my bags back out with me because I didn't want to leave them there. Found these two boys, dragged all my stuff in, and I finally made it. That was August 31st, 1992, my first taste of Mongolia. But here is the airport. Oops. Okay. Which way do I point? See, that's how we land. Okay, so the airport is the airplane lands in the middle of nowhere, and you actually have to go and get your own stuff. The building is actually way over on this side, and the airport was like this for many, many years until recently. Okay. This is what Mongolia looked like back then. It was post-communist. So if you think like Russian, Soviet bloc type of things, you get these cinder block type of buildings. They all look the same, very drab, very colorless, and the areas that they have for children playgrounds and public areas, so run down and dirty and rusty. On the outskirts of town, they have these little gers. That's the Mongolian yurt. The Russian word is yurt, and that's what most people are familiar with, but it's actually a ger. And they live there, and it's like urban sprawl, but it's not urban. So they just continue growing on the outskirts of the city, and these are the areas that they live in. But there's no transportation, there's no roads. So, I actually literally had to ride horses to get to these communities. Okay, Mongolia had no toilet paper. This is the first Mongolian toilet paper, and I was like singing hallelujah praises when toilet paper was invented, because before that they gave you newspaper. And I'm like, no, I don't want to die of toxic poisoning. I'm not going to use newspaper. And so, I actually went to a dollar store where I had to buy a one roll of toilet paper for $1. Now, there were only like 200 sheets. I mean, you actually counted squares back then. That's how valuable they were. So you'd count them, and it was like 5 cents a sheet, of toilet paper. So when they first came out with toilet paper, though, there were so many holes in it, you actually had to wrap it around 50 times to get a full square of coverage, okay? But I was so proud of toilet paper, I took this picture and sent it home. This is the Mongolian money. It's called the tugrug. And the tugrug value has devalued so much over the years, it's crazy. But back then, there was a 1 tugrug bill, a 3, a 10, and a 20. The 20 was the largest denomination. But the exchange rate was like 400 tugrugs to $1. Now, when I had to go and pay my rent and stuff, I had to exchange money, but I needed to take a backpack to get my tugrug money in. The saying was back then, you have to be very careful when you go to the bank, because if you get robbed, you can lose everything. And by this they mean there was a man who went to the bank, got out a whole bunch of money, he had to cart it home in a wheelbarrow. And he was robbed on the way. They dumped all the money and stole the wheelbarrow. That's how valueless the money was. Now, the biggest problem in Mongolia at that time was alcoholism. And I hate to say it, it's probably still a big problem now. But if you think about it, the economy is in shambles. It's freezing cold. You live so far north that the nights last forever, and the winter lasts 7 to 8 months out of the year. You kind of wonder why not everybody is an alcoholic. Well, I was sharing during Sabbath school, they say, oh, the Russians taught us how to drink, and now we can out-drink the Russians. They can. But the problem is you have these drunkards everywhere. And by everywhere, I mean literally everywhere. They line the streets. And because of my history with my father and alcoholism and abuse, I had a special fear and disgust of these people. And let me tell you, Satan knows your weaknesses. And so he used this to torment me. On a regular basis, maybe once a week, sometimes more, I was assaulted by a drunk. Literally. I still have scars from when I got attacked. I'd have people just grab an umbrella and start whacking me over the head. This one grandpa in the street, he just started hitting me. And, at that time, I didn't know why. I later found out he thought I was a runaway daughter-in-law. I'm like, I look Mongolian, but I don't speak it, so obviously I'm not your daughter-in-law. He was just whacking me and hitting me. I would run home and hide, on the bus. Some drunk guy decided I would be his new girlfriend, and he tried to drag me off the bus. Nobody will help. It's a communist mentality. Your business is your business, and mine is mine. Don't get me involved. So the other thing is, I couldn't even ask for help. I would scream in English, Korean, French, Espanol. It didn't matter. Nobody understood me, okay? So I'm like, what am I going to do? And I would fight and kick back, but don't let them fool you. They're drunk, but they are still men, and they're a lot stronger than I was. So this happened so often that I became paranoid. I didn't even want to go outside. And then one day, I have a very flimsy wooden door. My drunk neighbor miscalculated and thought that his house was my house. And he thought that I was his wife that was not opening the door, and he broke down the door and came in. And I thought, oh, I'm going to die here. And he started beating me. So I grabbed my broom and I started fighting back. That wasn't working. So what I did was I started hitting the ceiling. And then the people from upstairs came down, and they were friends of mine, and they helped me. After that, I realized, oh, I'm not safe inside either. And I started praying. I said, Lord, I think I've had it. I'm done. I can't handle this. And then the final straw came when a fellow missionary and I, we were invited to a young boy's hair cutting ceremony. Now, it's very interesting in Mongolia. They're very shamanistic, superstitious, and they believe they can outsmart the spirits, okay? So if the spirits are that dumb, you wonder why they're scared of them. But they keep their children's hair long to psych the spirits into thinking that the boys are girls. So, they're an Asian culture. They value their sons more than their daughters. How foolish is that? Okay, so they wait until the kids are 5. Now, in terms of public health, this actually makes a lot of sense because maternal child health, it's up to age 5 that the children are more at risk anyway. So in that sense, they were quite smart. But at age 5, they figured, our kids are safe now. They're not going to die. So they'll have this, ritual haircutting ceremony. And because we were foreigners, this is going to be really nifty. I'm going to have my son's hair cut by foreigners. So they invited us over to get the haircut. So I showed you the picture of that rural area where we had to take a final bus and you have to hike, somewhere else. We didn't know where to go. So they told us, meet us at the final bus stop. We'll pick you up there. So my friend Kathy and I went. And Kathy's even smaller than I am, very petite. And the two of us were waiting at that bus stop, and we're waiting, and nobody was coming. And then at that time, 4 drunk young men decided, look, new, fresh pickings. And, they don't touch Kathy. She's blonde, blue-eyed, very white, and they know that they can get in trouble if they mess with foreigners, but they thought I was Mongolian. So they started dragging me down an alley. And Kathy and I were kicking and screaming and fighting and doing everything we could, but number one, it's 2 against 4, and they were very big. And Kathy kept saying, Joanne, calm down, don't fight back, it'll just get worse. I'm like, are you crazy? How can it get worse? Just fight! So I was biting, and I was doing everything I could. I grew up a tomboy, so I can fight pretty well. But 2 against 4 doesn't work. And when they got us down to a dead alley, I thought, oh my goodness, we're going to get raped and killed here. And I just, the only thing that kept going on in my mind was, you become incoherent. You can't even talk, and you say, Lord help us, Lord help us, Lord help us, please save us, And, Kathy was, she spoke a little Mongolian. She's like, stop it, stop it. I'm like, oh, that's really effective. So when they started ripping at our clothes and stuff, I was just crying. We were hysterical. And then all of a sudden, they just threw us down and then took off running. And I just looked around. I'm like, oh, somebody must have come. Maybe it's the police or something. We looked everywhere, and nobody was there. But I know to this day that the Lord sent his guardian angels there, and those guys saw them. And so they took off running. But that was it for me. That was the last straw. This is all within a span of 2 months, okay? And I said, Lord, I'm done. I'm sorry. I admit failure. This is very hard for me to see to, but I admit I have failed. I'm not going to handle this any longer. I'm leaving. So I went back to my room, and I even was getting ready to start packing. And then Kathy's husband, Brad, came to me, and he's like, listen, Joanne, you came all this way. Come on. Are you seriously going to give up? I'm like, yeah, I'm seriously giving up. I'd rather not die. And he's like, you came all this way to what? Minister to your closets? How effective have you been? You haven't done anything yet. How can you leave now? But I really struggled, and I tell you, I wrestled with God, and I prayed, and I said, Lord, then you need to take this burden away from me. You know, Satan is not stupid. He just kept at it because he knew that was my weak point. You know, he was never going to let up. And then, I came because I wanted to share God's love with these people, but I hated them. You know, how can you share God's love with people that you hate? And I despise them. I'm like, they're disgusting and dirty and hateful. You know, I'm like, I'm not here to share the gospel with these people. You know, go and burn in hell. You know, that's what I was thinking, you know. And I thought, Lord, you know, number one, this is ruining me. You know, I can't handle this. And so I struggled for 3 days, and I prayed, and I fasted, and I said, Lord, take this burden away from me. And I said, okay, we will try it one more time. And I'm like, I'm going to hang in there. And I went out that very afternoon. I got attacked by another drunk. Okay, so I thought, this is the answer to my prayer, Lord. You know, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to handle this? I can't communicate with these people. I can't even scream for help. And you know, at that time I realized, and this is something for all of us to keep in mind, God doesn't necessarily remove the obstacles in our paths. However, he gives us whatever tools are necessary to overcome them. And at that time, God gave me a very special gift. And to this day, I want to let you know that spiritual gifts are alive and well, and you just need to search for them and struggle with the Lord until you find it. He gave me the gift of tongues. Now, let me tell you, Mongolian, as Dr. Billy over there will tell you, it's an incredibly difficult language to learn. Now, they use the Cyrillic alphabet. Their grammar is Ural-Altaic, which is the Asian group, Korean, Japanese, that group of languages. But its pronunciation is very guttural Western European. So you get this very strange combination of which I was fully prepared. I had a degree in French, I spoke Korean, and I had studied Russian. What kind of perfect combination is that? And yet it was still difficult for me. But within 3 months, I was speaking Mongolian fluently and teaching the Bible in Mongolian. And I will tell you to this day, that is impossible. I don't care how talented you are. That is not just linguistic talent. That is a spiritual gift. And he knew I needed that because now I could yell back at these drunks in Mongolian. I could scream for help in Mongolian, and I could manage. I could shop. I could eat. I could do what was necessary to make my ministry more effective. 3 months. Think about that. Би өнөөдөр Монгол хэллийг бүр Euro 7-8 арай дээр ярьж чаддаг байна. So I just said, probably now my Mongolian is even better than my Korean. So I want to go on with our slides here. So I started teaching Bible to a small home group. It actually started one-on-one. Here's another way in which God works mysteriously. How on earth would my French degree come in handy in Mongolia? Well, it did, because I needed an excuse. We're tent-making missionaries. We don't have religious visas or missionary visas. I needed an entry point, and mine was as a teacher. So I taught English, and I taught French at the Foreign Language University. So my Alliance Française came in handy. I got my French teaching certification when I lived in France. I never expected in my wildest dreams that that would come in handy in Mongolia, of all places. But my first Bible student was one of my French university students, and she eventually studied with me over a period of a year and became our first baptized Mongolian Adventist church member. So this group started one-on-one, and then it grew 2, 3, 4, continued to grow. That's my hallway corridor area. This is my living room, continued to grow. It was fully packed until we had to rent a location because they no longer fit in my house. Praise the Lord. You know, God also provides for us in mysterious ways, and we need to acknowledge that his timing is not our timing, and his is perfect timing. We just need to adjust ours to his. So I'm going to back up one. When we were at this stage, I would have sometimes 20, 30 people come to my house on Sabbaths for church. And, they're very poor and they're very young. Now, remember, I had just turned 21 when I landed in Mongolia, and I'm the oldest in that group. So they are all younger than me, high school students, teenagers, little children. And they're coming here, and they're so poor that they're lucky if they get one meal a day. So they come to my house for worship, and I need to feed them. There's no potluck, it's Joanne luck. Okay, it's whatever I have at home, that's what you get for lunch. So basically, I took whatever I had, and I threw it in a pot, because soup is very filling. There's lots of fluids in there, right? Let's fill it up with liquids. So I make a bunch of soup. So if I've got cabbage, it goes in, potatoes, carrots, and then I use macaroni noodles because it bloats and it makes it even more filling. So I would make this big old pot of soup, but these kids had bottomless pits for stomachs because they're starving. So they would eat, and they would eat, and they would continue to eat, and I just kept praying, Lord, please let there be enough. And I tell you, just like the widow that Elijah took care of during the famine, God takes care of his own. That pot of soup never emptied until everybody was full. And then when I went in to look at the pot, after the last bowl had been scooped, it was empty. I should have, but I never looked as I was scooping. I didn't want to test God, let's not push it, okay? I'm like, Lord, I trust you. Keep that soup coming. And then come the third or fourth Sabbath, it's not the soup that ran out, it was my money. So as a self-supporting missionary, we were funded, but my salary was $25 a month. And that's not going to go very far when I have to feed 30, 40 hungry kids every week. So after the third Sabbath, I usually ran out of money. And I'm thinking, Lord, what am I going to do now? I'd raid my kitchen, raid the fridge, looking everywhere. Okay, fourth Sabbath coming around. I do not have any food for these kids. And so I'm praying, Lord, okay, they're your kids. You promised to feed us. You better take care of us. And so I got this very strong impression. I knew it was a spirit, but this is what you do. You fight it. This is the problem, right? I said, go to the post office. I'm like, I don't want to. It's 25 below zero, and I don't want to get dressed. Going outside is an endeavor. You have to wear like 7 layers of clothes, and then you have to walk 40 minutes to the post office, often to be greeted by an empty box. So I said, Lord, no, I'll go later. No, go to the post office. So I'm like, okay. So I start this 20-minute ritual of getting dressed, to get my sorels on and my ski coat, and then I head out to the post office. There's only one little letter from someone I have no idea, and it's very shaky, kind of grandma handwriting. I'm like, I don't even know who this is. I came all the way here for nothing. So I put it in my bag, and I was getting ready to head out. Got another strong impression from the Spirit. Open it now. I'm like, I'm not going to open this letter and read it in public. There's all these people here, and, open it now. I'm like, okay, God. It's almost like, Samuel, have you called? So I opened the letter up. There's this cute little letter with the shaky handwriting. Oh, my name is so-and-so, and I've been reading your articles in the Adventist Frontier magazine. I really wish I could, help more, but I live on a very tight Social Security budget, so this is really all I can afford. And I look, and there's no money anywhere. So I'm like, oh, great. The postal workers opened my mail and stole the money again. And this happened all the time. But there was a cute little bookmark in there. I'm like, oh, well, she meant well. And I was, taking the bookmark, and I was putting it away, and I finished reading the letter, and she's like, but I heard you get robbed all the time in your mail. So I thought I would be a little sneaky. I don't think they read English, so, if you look at this bookmark, it's kind of a funny one. There's 2 of them. They're the same bookmark, and I taped them back to back. And if you open up the tape, I folded the money and stuck it in there. Really smart grandma. So I got my key out, and I stripped open the tape, and sure enough, there was this folded, into eighths maybe, $10 bill. And I just sat down in the post office and started bawling my head off, and everybody thought I was crazy, because remember, they think I'm Mongolian. So this crazy Mongolian girl doing it on the floor crying. And I was just crying like, oh, praise the Lord. You really take care of your own. And then I looked at the postmark. It was almost 3 months ago. God touched that lady's heart 3 months in advance, timed it just right so that letter and that money would arrive the 2 days before Sabbath. And then God made me go and get it and open it then so I could, save the extra trip. I could buy the groceries on my way home. God is good. Oh, sorry. So this is one of my favorite pictures. This is a first Adventist baptism. And for those of you who are old enough, you may recognize that is actually Pastor Elder Bob Fulkenberg. He was the GC president, General Conference president, back in 1993. So this is October 1993, 11 months after I had entered Mongolia, we had our first baptism. The girl that's getting hugged is Davahu, and the girl that's on the side with the curly hair is Inkbayat. And these are our first two Adventist baptized members in Mongolia. Inkbayat is the one who was my French student. Now, Davahu eventually married and moved to Sweden because her son has some disability, and Sweden has socialized medicine, and so even illegal immigrants over there are able to access it. So she's getting treatment for her son there. But Inkbayat is still going strong. She is now the health ministry's director for the mission. The baptisms continued. If those of you who recognize him, this is Elder John Ash. He was the former president of the Far East Asia Committee. I just really dated myself, right? Most people don't even know what that is. Before they were split into North Asia Pacific Division and South Asia Pacific, it was all lumped together as Far East Asia. And he's conducting our next baptism. And then the baptisms continued, and we grew. 5 or 6 people here, 6 or 7 people there, until we had our big baptism of, I think it was 17 members. And this is in October 1997 when we officially organized the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Mongolia. Now, in the interim, during that summer, I had come out on furlough and I had gotten married, and I hauled my husband back with me to Mongolia. So we doubled our power. And on that day, you can see him here, we had a Mongolian wedding too. So we kind of joke, everyone's like, oh, you do look like Genghis Khan? No. But we joke, my husband and I, we can never get divorced, because if we did, we have to get divorced 3 times, because we got married 3 times. We got married in Loma Linda, La Sierra Church. We got married again in Guam, because that's where he's from. And then we had a 3rd wedding ceremony in Mongolia. Now, the reason we did this, it wasn't just to, flaunt extra money, because we didn't have it. It was because we wanted to show them what a Christian marriage ceremony was about. They had never seen a Christian wedding. They had no concept of what it means to be blessed by the Lord and in the church. So we did it just to set an example for them, in Mongolian gear, but with a thoroughly Christian ceremony. And they loved it. And to this day, they follow that. So now our young people are getting married in the church. So right after our wedding ceremony, we held our official church charter. And so this is Elder John Ash. Next to him is our very, very young, back then, pastor in training, and his name is Bolt. So you'll remember him. He is now the executive secretary for the mission. He's got his master's degree from the Philippines, and he's continuing to go strong. Way in the corner there is actually my husband, and the bearded fellow there is our ADRA director. And so this was the official formation of the church. So just a couple years ago, we actually had the 20th anniversary of our Mongolian church. So, Mongolia today, everyone's asking, I'm meeting old friends, are like, oh, so Joanne, where are you right now? I'm like, well, I'm in Mongolia. They're like, still? I said, no, again. I was called back again. My husband was a military dentist. As Jake was saying, he got a military scholarship with the Air Force to go to dental school. And so we were serving in Japan. And we were, doing well. I mean, you don't make a lot of money, but it's quite comfortable. If you talk to military dentists, they're not very busy. So, they do a lot of paper pushing, and they see whatever active duty patients are around, and then they have what's called Space A for the families and retirees. So it wasn't busy, but it was very comfortable, and everywhere we went, we ministered. So, it wasn't like we took a break from being missionaries. When we were stationed in Texas, we ministered at the church in Texas. In fact, Julia, I think yes. So we met Julia when we were stationed in San Antonio. We were youth pastoring there, and we helped out the Houston church too. So we'd have joint youth retreats and stuff like that. Everywhere we went, you never take a break from being a missionary. The 1,000 Missionary Movement's motto is once a missionary, always a missionary. This is true. Once a Christian, always a Christian. And every Christian is a missionary. So wherever we went, we ministered. When we were in Riverside, we pastored there. We met Ellie, a bunch of our other friends there. When we were in Japan, we worshiped at Tachikawa Japanese Church. So my kids speak Japanese. It's great. So everywhere we went, okay, it's not like we took a break. But at that time, even though we were quite comfortable, sorry, I don't think that picture's in the right order. Okay, but anyway, so even though we were very comfortable, God calls in mysterious ways. I keep saying God works in mysterious ways, He provides in mysterious ways, He also calls in mysterious ways. Mongolia has changed. Number one, look at the airport. There's actually a nice terminal. Now, Billy didn't think it was all that great, but at the airport terminal, he had a lot of trouble getting in and out. But the airport has an actual jet bridge, too. okay? And they have a luggage carousel. They have free carts now. I mean, we've come a long way from when I land in the middle of the tarmac. We have colorful buildings. They're not even just drab, gray, concrete blocks now. We have these huge skyscrapers in the city. Unfortunately, we also have the traffic to go along with it. And we have new monetary bills, so I don't need a backpack to change money. In case you didn't notice that denomination, 20 is now not the highest, it's 20,000. So the exchange rate has skyrocketed. The money has devalued even more, but it's still poking along. Everything is working. Our baptisms continue. The church is growing and growing. This obviously is summer because nobody in their right mind would try to get baptized in the winter in a river in Mongolia. Well, actually, it would be an ice block. We couldn't do it anyway. And the church has continued to grow. This is actually from the It Is Written. If Fred and Jane are here, they joined us on this trip. We had a huge baptism after the It Is Written mission trip a couple years back. This is an auditorium that we actually have to rent now. We are 2,500 people strong now. Those are Pathfinders. Now, if you look very carefully, though, you can't really see. They're not matching uniforms, okay? They come from all over the world because they're donated. So you'll get like Lake Mission Conference, you'll get, East Riverside, Southern California. You'll see everybody's got different badges on their things, but they are so proud of their Pathfinder uniforms. We actually even have some from Taiwan. So, we've got them from Korea. We've got them donated from all over. We don't have a Mongolian Pathfinder conference yet, but we do have a group coming out to Oshkosh next summer. 22 churches now from my one home church. We have over 2,400. The numbers are now 25, I understand. We have 6 ordained pastors, 5 Pathfinder companies among the churches. We have the fully translated Bible and 20 other translated books, including Spirit of Prophecy. We have 10 expat families living there and a tiny church school that's attached to the Central Church Elementary School. God has done amazing things in the past 27 years. But like I said, he calls again. Now, there's my husband and my son. This was back when we were stationed in Japan. He was a major then, now he's a lieutenant colonel. And like I said, we were doing well now. If any of you are familiar with the military, they offer a very posh retirement, okay? But you have to do the full 20 years. Okay, so it's 20 years or bust. You can do 19 years, 364 days, and you will get 0. But if you finish your full 20 years, then you will get 50% of your highest salary, base salary, for the rest of your life. Now, my husband is a little old because he started late, got into this late. However, we still would have had plenty of time to use that 50% salary. And we had decided that once he retired from the military, we were going to go full-time mission service as tent makers because we no longer were dependent on a salary. He didn't have to work somewhere and be somewhere at a certain time. So we really wanted to go back to Mongolia. That was always our long-time dream. And God knows this. He knows that our heart has never fully recovered from leaving Mongolia. But he still had 5 years to go. So we're like, okay, we're going to finish strong, we're going to get that pension, and then we're going to go to Mongolia. And so, that was the plan. He had just gotten his new pin. He hit lieutenant colonel a couple of years back. Those are my other girls, the oldest and the second, and then my youngest. And we were so happy and proud, and we're like, this is great and whatever, but God has other plans. And he called when we were least expecting it, I had gone back to Mongolia several times to do interim short-term mission trips. And during the last one, the new mission president was a Korean pastor. And he was explaining all the challenges of working there. And he said, Joanne, we desperately need you to come back. And he started listing all the reasons. He's like, there's no foreigner who speaks Mongolian as fluently as you. In fact, when I go there, most people mistake me for Mongolian. They think I'm a little strange because the vocabulary is a little off or the accent is a little off. They'll go, oh, are you Inner Mongolian? No. Oh, you must have lived overseas for a while. No. Then what are you? Well, I'm not Mongolian. And, but, I am comfortable there. I know everyone. Most of them there call me mom or grandma. And I'm like, oh, let's not do that part. Because I am the ones who brought them into the church. And now we have a whole second generation of Adventists growing up there because I was the one who had planted those seeds. So Pastor Kim was saying, you need to come back. We really need you to come back. The church needs you now. And I said, oh, we plan to come back. We'll be here in 5 years' time. And he's like, no, now. And I said, no. I've got 4 kids to put through school. Back then my oldest daughter was a freshman in college. I'm like, no. We have a long ways to go. So let's, just hold on, hold the horses. We're okay. I've got a schedule. Now you remember what happened to my schedule the last time. God's like, okay, we're going to rearrange that plan of yours. Well, he did the same again. And so when God called this time, we struggled. We really did. And we prayed about it. But when the Spirit calls, you feel a burden that just doesn't go away. And the knocking became louder and louder and louder. And I started throwing out Gideon tests. Gideon threw out the fleece, like, oh, okay, if the ground is dry, the fleece is wet. No, can I do one more test? Let's make it the reverse. Well, I threw out 4, okay? I was like, no, God, I'm still not certain, so I need one more assurance. And then round 4, one more, all 4 Gideon tests came back in the affirmative within a span of weeks. And I'm like, oh, I'm so doomed, because the kind of Gideon test that I threw out, I thought would be impossible to fulfill. And I did it on purpose. Then I could use it as an excuse not to go, right? Oh, yeah, God's not going to fall for that. So I'm like, Lord, what am I going to do? What are we going to do? All 4 of them, boom, 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 in succession, very rapidly. Finally, out of the mouth of babes, my youngest, then 7 years old, she turned to me and she's like, Mom, if you keep trying to run away, God is going to send a big fish to swallow you. And then you are going to stink, and I'm not going to give you hugs and kisses anymore. It's like, can you imagine 3 days in the belly of a fish? No way, Mom, no more hugs and kisses from me. You're going to smell so bad. 7-year-old child. That's what it took to make us come to our senses, and we were ashamed in front of her. Why did it take a 7-year-old to point out the obvious? You cannot run from God. So we accepted the call. That's what Jireh said I would look like. And it doesn't even matter if you're in the Gobi Desert or wherever, he can still send the fish. So apparently, yes, God can do anything. And I really didn't want to spend 3 days in the belly of a fish. So this is the reason God called me back. There's, I told you, a whole second generation now of Adventists, and we're losing them before they even get grounded, because there's no Adventist education there. We have this small Adventist elementary school, but as soon as they finish there from 8th grade, they're out on their own, they're hanging out with their public school friends and atheist friends and communist friends and non-Christian friends, and they're getting lost. Now, even the parents aren't firmly grounded, so it's not like they've got that support at home either. So Pastor Kim says, we need an academy. We need an academy. And I said, sure, 5 years later. And he's like, no, now. So this is the plan for Gateway. That's the name of our project. We will have an international academy, a vocational school, an agriculture center, a wellness center, and a resort and recreation center. And the reason for that is this needs to be self-sustaining. You can only ask for donations for so long. It needs to be able to move on its own will. So this is going to be a for-profit center. We are going to use the income from these subsidiary institutions to fund the schools and the scholarships. We're going to have our full-paying students so that we can give our Adventist students 95% scholarships so that not a single person gets left behind. We want all of our children in our Adventist school. We've already purchased the land, and believe it or not, even though it looks quite barren, that's really nice land in Mongolia compared to some of the other options. We've got rolling hills. We have 150 acres. So this is a beautiful place, perfect location outside the city and the smog and the traffic, but not so far away that it makes it impossible for them to commute. And we also have it close enough to the airport that people coming in and out can stop there. This is actually the city plan for our land, that area, and the orange parcel is ours. And they're actually planning to build what's called the Shintov, which is like the new city center for that area because it's so close to the new airport that's being built. So we have prime location. Everyone's like, how on earth did you get this? I'm like, I don't know, this is God's doing, not mine. Every time people say, this is a huge project, how are you going to handle it? I said, oh yeah, this is God's project, not mine. And we are moving forward with this. This is our land certification. It took us almost a year to get because we did it legally. No shortcuts, no bribes, no backdoor, no under the table. And so it took a long time, but they finally get it. Oh, these Adventists don't work that way. These people don't do that. So, all right, even though it took a while, let's give these folks a try. This is actually the architect's rendition of what our campus will look like. And in case you can't tell, the buildings are round, very much like our Mongolian gers. And this is on purpose. This is supposed to be a culturally effective and, I guess, appropriate type of school where they feel ownership. This is their school. This isn't a bunch of foreigners coming in and imposing Western culture on them. This is their school. And it's going to be a boarding school. So they'll have the academy there, they'll have the dorms, the indoor gyms, because nobody's going to go outside in negative 40-degree weather to exercise. And this is the project that's moving forward. Now, when I talk about this, I always get kind of panicky because it is a huge project. Anyone who's worked in education knows that just even managing a school, I'm a former principal too, running the administration is hard enough. Doing it from scratch is crazy. And right now, and this is one of the reasons I'm here, is I'm on a tour of our Adventist institutions to recruit teachers. Oh, look at all these young people. Adventurous spirit, right? And I told you, Mongolia is a lot different now. You don't have to take your bags off the tarmac anymore. We have jet bridges. But seriously, all joking aside, I just spent the afternoon with the Department of Education talking with a bunch of the student teachers and the people there. I stopped by Andrews. I'm headed to Loma Linda, La Sierra, PUC, Weimar. Eventually, I'm hoping to hit all our Adventist schools because we need the passion of young people. Okay, I'm young in spirit, but it's now time that we start passing that baton along. And don't let anyone, like our scripture reading today, don't let anyone discourage you because you are young. The founders of our church were young. Church planting in Mongolia was done with young people power, and I believe the final ministry of our church will be accomplished through our young people. And so today, and this is an appeal, definitely, but this is just something for you to think about, whether as a teacher, an agriculture specialist, I don't know. How, I don't know. When, I don't know. But remember, when God calls and you are called, remember the words of my young daughter, don't try and run away because God will send that fish to swallow you. And keep in mind that all of God's plans are perfect. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a future and a hope. And this is not just for the church in Mongolia, this is for the church here in Collegedale. This is true for anyone and everyone. And I can guarantee you that when you have your 10-year plan and you end up taking detours because God calls you, it is for a more perfect plan. You will never end up with the short end of the stick. God's plans are perfect plans.